Great. Welcome, everybody. We're excited for you to join us today. I was just having a quick look at some of the registrants. I see we have some local students. We have marketing and advertising fellows in there too, and potential clients. So thank you for joining us. I'm Louise Rasmussen. I'm the Strategic Planning Director here at LoSasso, and we're excited to share our Lunch and Learn today, which is all around the theme of making the business case for a B2B brand tracker. And we're excited to have our special guest here, Adam Jones, who's going to be doing a Q&A style chat with me today. So Adam, I don't know whether you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much, Louise, for having me along for this session, and thank you everyone for attending. So my name is Adam Jones. I'm an executive director at Werk. We are a full-service B2B market research firm, and myself, I am a career B2B market researcher. As my accent suggests, I got my start as a humble data analyst over in the UK, but have been in the US for the past 8 years, where I've moved into a director position. And the reason why I wanted to be a part of this session, the reason why it's such a good fit is because brand tracking research has been crucial to my progression in this industry. I've directed and led many brand tracking projects covering various different industries, from professional services to finance, technology, and more construction and DIY oriented audiences as well. So yes, thanks so much for having me along, Louise. Really excited to be a part of this session.
Great, thanks, Adam. And how Adam and I fit together. We've partnered over the last couple of years on a couple of B2B brand trackers, and I'm kind of from the marketing and advertising agency side of things. So we're often talking to our clients, recommending, and especially in B2B, they often don't have a research internal arm. So we tend to be that kind of research internal arm for them, and we started partnering a couple of years ago. So we wanted to just share our kind of secrets for success within the B2B world and B2B brand trackers specifically. So we'll have a Q&A style chat, as I mentioned. So please, as we go through, add any of your questions. We'll definitely have a chunk of time at the end to answer those. Remember to upvote them. If somebody else has put in the question, you can upvote it so we know which ones are the popular ones. So great. I'm going to dive straight in. As my team knows, and I'm going to break protocol a little bit here, I'm actually going to ask myself a question, but we love to start with, why, get straight to the heart of the matter. And for us over the last couple of years, why a B2B brand tracker? What we've seen, especially in that B2B side, there's great interest in understanding your brand. But often when it comes to that investment and spend on the brand, it's at a lesser extent in B2B than is in the consumer side. What we found is that a B2B brand tracker can be a really powerful tool in understanding where those growth opportunities are, a powerful tool in getting into conversations with the C-suite, highlighting those opportunities and really getting greater investment in the brand. So that's what we wanted to share with you today, a little bit kind of behind some of those secrets. And as Adam mentioned, he is an expert in actually the research side of it, conducting these brand trackers. So for those who may not be as familiar about a brand tracker, I was just going to start off, Adam, asking you the question, what is a B2B brand tracker?
Yeah, great question, Louise. I mean, at its heart, a B2B brand tracker, a brand health monitor, brand equity tracker, it comes in kind of various different guises, but it's a holistic way of looking at brand health in a competitive context. And there's essentially 3 stages to an ideal process. It starts with benchmarking, which could be the first wave, a deep dive to see the lay of the land. It then involves identifying tactics to improve brand health as a result of that benchmarking wave. And then ideally, tracking brand health on an ongoing basis to measure the ROI of those tactics. And the reason why it is a holistic process is because we're able to measure several different aspects of brand health, from performance across the marketing funnel, which includes the likes of awareness, consideration, usage, through to brand positioning, understanding, well, what does a brand stand for, how this compares to competitors, and how it compares to what is important to decision makers. We can also measure customer engagement, so the likes of advocacy and satisfaction, and also the likes of where and how to show up in the buyer journey. So what are the channels that we can reach decision makers? What are the content that's going to resonate with them? Because of this holistic approach, it really allows us to take very tactical or provide very tactical and strategic recommendations as a result of the research. It's often fairly easy as experienced researchers to diagnose where to improve brand health and what are some of the strengths that we can leverage. For as an example, if a brand has an issue with consideration or usage, then there could be an opportunity to enhance the value proposition or the unique selling proposition to align with what the market values. I had a client that I worked with in the content management solution space that had this challenge. We diagnosed it as part of the research. So ultimately, we could recommend that they needed to demonstrate their capabilities for delivering the likes of productivity gains, using predictive solutions, using software that is easy to configure, ultimately aligning the brand with what the market values. And that allowed us to work with their sales and marketing strategy teams to help to improve the brand. So I guess in a nutshell, that's the what and the why of a brand tracker. So that's kind of the what and the why, Louise. But from your perspective and in your role, your expertise, your experience, I mean, how do you go about choosing a partner that can ultimately help you deliver on that kind of wide-ranging scope?
Yeah, great question. And I don't know whether you can hear the train in the background, but
No,
we're
you can.
close. We're close to the metro, so just in case you were hearing that noise in the background. Yeah, actually finding the right partner is absolutely critical, because we'd mentioned, the investment also behind a B2B brand tracker is pretty significant. So we want to make sure from our perspective, we're helping our clients get the right partner. So we want to do the due diligence, and where we've found success actually is conducting an RFP for them, where we're creating a project and we get them to write a proposal. What's the methodology? What type of questions would they be asking? What are the costs? What are the timings? Then we'd take those 3 to 5 potentially strongest contenders, and we'd actually get them to come in and present to the client. And I'm smiling here because that's how Adam and I became partners a couple of years ago. Adam had responded to one of our RFPs, and they blew it out of the water. And I think the biggest aha in that process for us has been make sure when you're getting those contenders in that they do have specifically B2B experience. It is in a unique niche compared to consumers, because often the critical piece here is that we're looking for very hard to find kind of niche targets. So that would be kind of one of the key things that we would recommend from the get-go. And so that's actually one of my key questions for next question for Adam, as we start to share some of the, what's worked successfully for us as we've gone into the venture of B2B brand trackers. And I'd love to ask, how critical is it to get that quality recruit when it comes to B2B brand trackers?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. What you're alluding to there, Louise, with regard to the investment that brands put behind brand tracking research, and ultimately the investment that we'd end up hopefully influencing or recommending to ultimately improve the brand. The level of investment that might be required means that the recommendations, the insights need to be built from quality data from a really qualified audience. So kind of some of the tips and tricks or processes with regard to how to get there, it's just all about taking time. First off, taking time with clients to define the audience, as ultimately they're the experts, right? We want to lean into the knowledge that they have of their industry. And making sure we're getting down to the specific subsection of an industry, a market that they play in. As an example, I had a client in the cybersecurity solution space, which, the overarching level is kind of IT decision makers, but we're not necessarily focused on the individuals that are making decisions on the brand of laptops or the video conferencing software that is used by their organization. We had a need to go after very specific roles related to the likes of cloud security, network architecture, cyber risk. So again, they sit within the overarching universe of IT decision makers, but we worked very closely with our client to define the types of roles, responsibilities that they engage with on a regular basis that ultimately we need to speak to as part of the research program. So there's time that we need to spend up front. There's also time that needs to be spent as part of the survey instrument. So making sure that we're dedicating time to screen respondents appropriately. So making sure that we are surveying or interviewing the right individual at the right company with that right level of expertise, and ultimately, in some ways, testing their credentials and making sure that we're conducting our due diligence. What can be really helpful is working with B2B specific recruitment partners that ultimately appropriately vet individuals and have experience in recruiting those more niche candidates. We're also firm believers here at Werk that using custom recruit approaches to ensure that we're surveying the right folks can be particularly valuable here. But with all that in mind, it is really important to get down to a qualified target audience. But with brand research in particular, we do need to make sure that the sampling approach that we're taking isn't too restrictive, that ultimately it's representative of the market at large. We're not just focused on a very specific set of, let's say, cybersecurity solutions decision makers, to ensure that we are getting a true reflection of a brand's performance in the space. So go on, Louise, sorry.
I was also going to say we also partnered on a financial services client, and I think this is, for me, from that client side, why it's so important to get that quality recruit and we were drilling down to specific titles and specific key accounts. We were told by marketing, if we didn't hit the 10 prioritized accounts that the C-suite are interested in, then they would not have the confidence in the data. So it can get that specific, and it does really, really matter when you get to those C-suite. They're going to be asking you who's in that target, who's the survey. So that's totally agree, Adam. It's very specific to B2B in terms of finding them and making sure that they're part of your sample.
Yeah, it's super critical, right? It's making sure that we are speaking to the right folks, and that when leaders are hopefully taking action as a result of our findings, that it's being built on the folks that they are interested in as speaking with. And that example is perfect as it relates to the due diligence piece. I know you and your team, Louise, worked incredibly hard with the end client to define who we needed to, or who we wanted to survey, who we wanted to speak to, and that just made my life, my job, a lot easier to be able to conduct that due diligence, look into the feasibility, and craft the appropriate sample plan. I mean, based on the level of investment that we've talked about here, Louise, and the importance of data in crafting C-suite strategy. I mean, how do you, in your role, ultimately get that buy-in and sell in and ultimately help with that results piece with regard to the C-suite?
Yeah, I think a tip to share here is, as marketers, we often love speaking marketing speak. I'd love to talk about brand positioning, value propositions and all that stuff, but that's not the language that the C-suite are interested in. So kind of marketing 101, make sure that you're speaking your target speak. And successfully over the last couple of years, selling on our brand tracking has very much been, when talking to that C-suite, getting buy-in for the brand tracker, or even when presenting the results, make sure that you are speaking in their terms and make sure that you're speaking towards results. So when we were selling in, make sure that you're speaking in terms of what are the growth opportunities? How will this data help them meet their business objectives? Very much use it as a business intelligence tool for growth. And it just reminds me specifically on a professional services account, they were interested in North America in terms of their growth. What are the cross-selling opportunities? So when we sold in the brand tracker, we were talking about how we could dive into specific vertical industries. Sweet spot, their marketing was to the middle market. We could look at what are those cross-sell opportunities? How should we be communicating to them? So very much talking from the level that the C-suite were looking for in terms of those growth opportunities. So great question, Adam. I was also going to ask, speaking of results, what are some of the other key considerations we should be thinking about when reviewing results from a B2B brand tracker?
Yeah, great question, Louise. And I think there's certainly three very important considerations that I always think about with regard to brand tracking research and want to discuss at length with individuals like yourself and also clients as well. I'd say the first being the importance of benchmarking. Now, kind of comparing brand health to the competitive set is a key function of brand tracking. But it's also worthwhile taking a realistic view of who to compare against. I know in some of our previous engagements, Louise, that's been something that we've taken a lot of time to consider and plan for, in that we were working with a client that operates in a space with very clear market leaders. Our client wasn't necessarily in that space at the moment. So while we knew that there were a North Star of competitors to naturally think about and consider, we thought that as part of a research piece, they could be perhaps included later on down the line to understand exactly where our clients sat within that competitive context. So for that purpose, as part of the research, we focused on more of those direct competitors to understand, well, where exactly within more of that mid-tier space does our client play? How can they become a leader within that mid-tier space before eventually potentially taking on those Goliaths in the space? That's the first point. I think it's always worth considering. The second point would be around international research. If the brand tracker is international in nature, which it often can be, it's just worth respecting the impact of country and cultural norms and how individuals respond to surveys. For example, Brazilian respondents tend to be a bit more enthusiastic. Japanese respondents tend to be a little bit more reserved. And the responses to scales and these types of questions can be particularly important when we consider the likes of brand advocacy. An NPS score in one market doesn't necessarily directly compare or translate to a score in another market. So first and foremost, it's important to compare performance against competitors within one market first, and then just take more of a reserved approach when comparing directly across markets. And I think my last kind of key consideration here is all around cadence. Often there's a desire or an eagerness to continually track performance, keep a pulse on brand health. But in my experience, certainly in the most impactful brand trackers that I've seen and been a part of, there's an element of allowing for time to internalize the findings, time to then develop actions and plans around those findings, and then get them into the market before repeating the research, making sure that we allow enough time to ultimately measure and track their impact. So it's almost timings are just as important as capturing those insights. So those are my kind of key considerations from a research perspective piece. And insights, recommendations are driven ultimately by the data that we collect, Louise. But we can only take it so far as researchers. I mean, what do you think? What's your perspective as it relates to the role of brand storytelling in B2B brand trackers?
Yeah, and absolutely. Being the receiving end of that data and helping, as a brand strategist, helping your client kind of read through that data. Having had good and bad experiences, I would say, from data. So I would say if we're just handed, from brand strategy perspective, if we're just handed the data and there isn't a story woven around that, and by that I mean you're given an isolated 60% said so and so, it's really, really difficult to understand, what that means. So the best brand trackers and partners are those that do tell a brand story, and by that they're connecting the dots, so they can tell you if your awareness is down. They'll be looking at competitiveness. They'll be looking at what messaging are you putting through there, and you will weave a story by connecting all those dots together and where you are in that marketing funnel. It's fundamental for us to have that expertise and that depth and that holistic view that you guys bring in weaving all those data points together. So I would say it's absolutely fundamental in the brand storytelling, especially when you are then telling those stories to the C-suite. And what we've also found, and why you have this combination of Adam and I together here, it's great to have that independent voice, have your research partner present to the C-suite, because that is the independent voice that's coming in, and that they will believe and have that credibility with as well. So I was just thinking that's our last question, I think, isn't it, Adam, that we have for each other. So I did want to open it up and actually have a quick look at the questions that have been coming in. Just having a quick look at that. And actually, so Adam, there's a question from Kyle. Seems to be our most popular question here. And they would love to hear, I think, this one for you. What kinds of questions do you ask recruits? So when you're getting down to that kind of key target market that we want to get to, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, great question, Louise and Kyle from the chat. I mean, there's essentially three key parameters that we're focused on with regard to screening recruits, or the questions we'll ask to just ensure that we're getting down to that right individual. First, it's around the individual, and related to that, we might be asking questions around seniority, their role, their responsibilities, where they sit within the organization, the level of expertise or detailed knowledge that they have about a particular subject matter, or their role in a decision making unit. There's elements of understanding the type of organization. Are there certain revenue considerations that we need to take into account, certain headcounts that we need to take into account. Naturally, if it's focused on certain markets where they're based and where they work, and then kind of a third piece, again going back to the level of expertise, it could be certain knowledge or understanding about a space. It could be again, their involvement in the decision-making unit. More often than not, within the B2B space, is it in kind of contradiction to the B2C space, we're focused on at least influencers or final decision makers for a solution or a product, rather than those users. So I guess those are some of the examples of key questions we might ask to recruits, at least in the initial phase. And then there's established frameworks, brand health frameworks, that I've alluded to a little bit throughout the discussion, to ultimately understand, well, how well does a brand perform in a market? How does that translate to what the market values, and ultimately some of the recommendations we can provide to improving brand health?
Great. Actually, another questions type question for you, Adam, if such a thing exists. This is actually from Larry. And Larry's asked, what are the different types of metrics you use to measure brand health over time? For example, would it be awareness? Would it be an understanding of a brand position? Great question, Larry, because I know over our couple of projects, those would be key questions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fantastic question, Larry. So there's certain KPIs that we definitely want to include and track in brand health research. Unaided and aided awareness, consideration, usage, penetration, advocacy, satisfaction. That gets us kind of through the framework of a brand funnel. I'm a huge fan of brand positioning is naturally a key part of the research anyway, but a huge fan in understanding, well, what is important, what drives decision making, because ultimately, while our clients may have a strong idea of the position they want to occupy in the market, hopefully that then aligns or resonates with ultimately what influences decision making. So first of all, understanding, well, what's important, but then the extent to which brands, our clients' brand and then competitor brands, are associated with those attributes. And then, there's things like where decision makers go for information, specific channels, what's the type of content that they use to learn about different brands. There's essentially there's flexibility in certain degrees with what we can cover in a brand tracking research. There's established frameworks that we want to lean into, but we can do some advertising awareness elements of that as well, some specific ad testing. Ultimately, we craft a program around what our clients are looking to learn. Hopefully that helps to some degree, at least, Larry.
Yeah, and actually, I was just going to jump in. There's a question here that's related to that from Rachel. Do clients have control or insight over the questions? And I think I'll hedge my answer on that one and say yes and no. But just alluding to what you were talking about, Adam, yes, a brand tracker is tailored, and from absolutely, I think we were mentioning before, the client is the expert on their industry. We will make sure that we're tapping into their expertise and things like, brand attributes. When you're looking at that positioning, often from a brand strategy perspective, we're making sure that we're getting our positioning in there. We're making sure we're getting the right wording for our competitors. So those are all tailored. We'll also make sure that we're getting, when Adam was talking about benchmarking, we're making sure that we're getting the right competitive set in there. So there's definitely, it will be tailored towards the client. But as Adam was saying there as well, and he can jump in as well, but there's also proprietary questions that they know work across industries, across clients, and they have to make sure that those are being included in the right way. So just want to check that I answered that correctly as well, Adam.
Yeah, couldn't have put it better myself, Louise. There's freedom. Well, maybe the other way around. There's certain parameters that we want to work within. There's certain key metrics that are fundamental to measuring brand health, measuring brand performance, and are almost expectations, as it relates to this type of program. But the brands that we might want to compare ourselves against, the attributes that we want to measure and track, the different, again, marketing channels or approaches that our client that is relevant for our client, all of those, can certainly be influenced. And there's always room within a survey, within a program, for more ad hoc questions or certain measuring of trends. And that's the beauty of tracking as well, the ability to kind of introduce or remove the odd ad hoc question here or there. So yes, I think it's very much a case of, yes, there's some flexibility and there's certainly control and input that clients should have, but certainly within parameter, or working within established parameters, is particularly effective when it relates to brand tracking and brand health research.
Yeah, I've got a few more minutes, so I think we're actually getting through most of our popular questions here. So I also wanted, it's actually quite a quick response to this one potentially, is how long does the typical process from kind of RFI to end report, how long does that take? And is there a typical?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the very short answer is it depends. The more helpful answer is probably anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks at the short, on the shorter end. There's opportunities to perhaps move more efficiently if need be, through to I think the longest engagement I've worked on for brand trackers maybe lasted 3, 4, 5 months, when we're covering almost every country under the sun, with tons of different audiences, like lots of surveys, lots of interviews. It can take a very long time. But I'd say, traditionally a more straightforward brand tracker could be anywhere from, or brand kind of measurement research could be anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks, through to, how long is a piece of string, really. And ultimately it depends on, how efficiently, how effectively we can move, the type of audience that we're looking to recruit. If it's incredibly niche, then it might take a little bit longer. The eagerness of our clients to some degree, but there's a lot of moving factors that can influence it. But hopefully, that much more long-winded way of saying it depends provided a little bit of more context and clarity to the question.
Yeah, and I was actually just going to add to that, if you do conduct that RFP, you can see the differences between companies. And if companies telling you it's going to take 2 weeks to do, it really isn't that legitimate brand tracker, because there is a significant investment in that time. Final question here, it's an interesting one, and actually very near to our heart. Sometimes research is done and then sits on a shelf. How do you help ensure best results come from the results? So I was just going to answer that, often being that extension of your client's kind of insight and research team. I think that's where we can help. And I think it refers back a little bit to that question of speaking the language and depending on your audiences. And so we've found it can be most actionable, you're obviously firstly presenting out to your closest marketing team, and they're going to be the ones on the day-to-day using that and making it actionable. We've done that in various formats. So we've done it the longhand, and we always get, I would also advise getting the expert to present that. So we would always invite kind of Werk in to present that, and that would be the longer version. Also, depending on your audience, we make sure there's an executive summary. So for that C-suite, they're not going to be sitting through and be interested in all the wonderful brand storytelling and real depth that that a brand health study can give you, but there will be an executive summary that's speaking in their language and making sure that you're hitting the highlights. So I think also tailoring that research and the results and the finding to your audience internally, making sure you understand them, is also key to making sure it isn't just sitting on that shelf. Don't know whether, Adam, for you, if there's kind of where if you found, how do you make sure that results are going to be actionable and getting into the right hands?
Yeah, I mean, as much as we have control over that process, I think it's just doubling down on what you're saying there, Louise. It's ensuring that that the research is presented in an engaging manner, ensuring that the story and the takeaways are super clear. I think the another key element is, as much as we can influence it, ensuring that there's alignment or buy-in, across our client's organization, that we are going to present recommendations for how to improve, and then there's going to be consideration on how that can be actioned on, and ultimately investment put behind it. So I guess the alignment of buy-in would be the only kind of additional thing I'd flag from our perspective.
Yeah, no, and that's a really important one. So I realize we're at time. So want to thank everybody for joining us today on our Lunch and Learn. Hopefully our passion for B2B brand trackers has come across. And for those who weren't so familiar, you've been enlightened a little bit in this time. And building upon that, if you have any further questions for both Adam and I, please feel free to reach out. And I'm smiling as I'm looking at my computer because I have also just added, we did create a highlights document of our Q&A today, and I've just attached that, so you should be able to see it and be able to download it. But yeah, please feel free to, if you want to assess further whether you are thinking about going on the journey of conducting a brand tracker, please reach out to us. And thank you very much. And Adam, thank you so much for being our special guest as always. Pleasure to work with you and hear your insights as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Louise, and thanks for everyone for listening and paying attention.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Take
Bye-bye.
care all.